So we're now to Unit 5, Lecture 1. We're going to talk about human development here. Unit 5 will be human development as well as social psychology. Some very interesting stuff. Although, excuse me, those of you who took childhood development, some of this may be somewhat familiar to you, especially as we're talking about younger development. And for those of you guys who have taken or are enrolled in sociology, some themes in social psychology you may find somewhat repeating, which is good because that gives you a little bit of a background. But this will look at it a little bit differently. And again, where this will all look at it from the mental perspective, the individual perspective, as opposed to sociology looking at a group. So what? So what? So forth. Maybe not so what? Maybe so what? I thought sociology. It's good stuff. All right. So with that in mind, here we go. So as we go into this new unit of developmental psychology, what is developmental psychology? Developmental psychology is just looking at how we evolve, how we develop over time. The fact that as a 53-year-old man, I no longer think the same way I did when I was 5, which, by the way, also impacts my memories of being 5, because when I go back and look at what happened to me as a 5-year-old, I don't look at it with the mind of a 5-year-old anymore. I look at it the mind of a 53-year-old, which greatly has an impact on that. I might have mentioned this with memory. You know, I recently watched The Breakfast Club. And when The Breakfast Club came out in 1985, when I was 17 years of age, it was fantastic. It was a watershed. It was, this is what life is like, and why don't people understand us, that we can all just do this? And then when I watched it last summer, I'm like, what a bunch of whiny little kids. Get over yourself. Seriously, you're bringing a flare gun because you're going to make a lamp with an elephant? Come on. So it does, development does have an impact on us in the way that we change the way that we look at the world and all these other things. So when we look at developmental psychology and how we develop, and we got to look at different sort of ways. The nature versus nurture argument, how much of us is pre-wired, it's within our DNA, and how much of it is based on our experiences. And of course, our DNA can also impact our experiences and vice versa. Continuity versus stages. Do I just sort of, is it a gradual sort of change that happens, or are there distinct stages that happen? You know, is life just like I'm continuing to build and build and build and get bigger and bigger and bigger, putting sand in the hourglass? Or is it like a video game where I got to complete this level, defeat that boss before I can go to the next level? And if I don't complete this level, I'm not allowed to go to the next level. And then stability and change. Am I still, in essence, the same person I was at 15, 16, 17? Does your personality stay pretty consistent during your life, or are there opportunities to truly change? Or is this change really just an involvement of everyone that we should have been? Well, very little in childhood determines adult behavior. Virtually everything in our childhood propagates and towards some adult behavior. It's going to create tendencies towards some adult behavior. So we are a evolution of our childhood, and how much that has had an impact positively and negatively is this development that we see. Now we're going to talk about cognition again. Cognition is the way we think. And again, a 5-year-old doesn't think the same way as a 15-year-old, the same way as a 25-year-old. You know, when a 5-year-old, when you ask a 5-year-old what's wrong and they say, I don't know, sometimes they really just don't know. That's their mind. It's a lack of a frontal lobe, you know. You got the kid who's got the kitchen knife and is stabbing the drawer, gang, 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 and you go, why are you doing it? They don't. They really don't. Sometimes they do. So again, you're not thinking the same way. So we're going to talk about how these stages of thinking evolve, these stages of thinking development, knowing, remembering, processing, logic, all desires, all these things change over time. Now, again, I don't want to get into this whole biological thing, but let's take it back to the beginning. Zygotes, the fertilized egg, sperm hits egg, that turns into an embryo by about 17 to 56 days. This is when you're most susceptible during your pregnancy. But of course, ironically, this is the time where you don't know you're pregnant. So the time when you can do the most damage is the time where you don't even know you're pregnant. The first 4 or 6 weeks, you're still in the club, drinking whatever. Yeah, you're doing damage to the baby as you're, Six Flags, up and down on the roller coaster, you're doing damage. But our body is kind of set up for that too. Then you start to become a fetus about 9 weeks after conception, all the way to birth. It starts to become this mini human, and everything else. Expectant mothers can feel the kicking, can feel the movement. The fetus can hear muffled voices. This is why he prefers mom's voice or his dad's voice, because he hears mom's voice more often. And again, 4 weeks, skeleton starting to form. 8 weeks, all the organs are present, complete, and functioning, with the exception of lungs. You still got the little gills going on at that particular time. By 13 weeks, child sex can be distinguished. 15 weeks, you get the fluff. 16 weeks, the mother can feel the baby move. Heart's pumping 6 gallons of blood per day. Very rapid growth. Can actually have dreams at 4 months of age. 18 weeks, child's now complete. Only needs more time to grow. 20 weeks, synapse activities going on. Mother can feel hiccup at 22 weeks. And by 6 months, if born this young, the child could conceivably survive outside the womb pre-meat baby, pre-born ahead of time. Now, what's also interesting is the child can learn before it's even born. The mother's diet during pregnancy can actually lead to later preferences that the child has. And studies have shown this, where they have the mother eat a certain diet, that the child will actually prefer that. Newborns recognize and prefer their mother's voice because that's the voice they've always heard. They can recognize the father's voice. So as dad is reading to the baby, they can recognize it, but it's not really a preference to it because it hears a lot of voices. They begin to develop speech prior to birth. Contours of early crying resembles the mother's native language. So you actually start to cry in cadence of what your native language is. And they can sort of see this. They can hook up little electrical readings to the baby and see the reaction when you change the speech. If the mother says bebop, 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 bebop again and again and again, you'll see the neurotransmitters sort of bebop, bebop, and they get used to it. Then suddenly you go to babby, and they'll go, whoa, that's new. And then there's a little bit of excitement there. So it's taking it in. Mothers who read The Cat in the Hat out loud for hours during the 3rd trimester will have kids who will prefer to hear Dr. Seuss stories later because they get used to that pronunciation and enunciation of those words. Hormone exposure, extraordinarily important at this time. Hormones after birth are activational, lasting hours or days, yet during pregnancy, the exposures to the mother's hormones become organizational and they last a lifetime. Fetuses that share the same placenta share more personality traits. We talked about this before when we talked about twins, because when you share the same placenta, you are getting the exact same levels of hormones. High levels of stress hormones are accurate predictors of the child developing depression and anxiety down the road, because the mother's depression and anxiety goes on to the child. Now, again, this can also have a lot to do with the mother may experience depression and anxiety as the child is growing as well, but this early exposure can be hindering. 8 weeks, the fetus begins to secrete its own hormones, higher rates of testosterone and anti-Müllerian in boys, which act towards masculization, with higher rates of estrogen and progesterone in girls, which acts towards feminization. And again, these levels of hormones can tell a lot about a boy or girl or whatnot as they get older. It can impact things like digit length, the second finger compared to the fourth finger. Masculine ratio. If you have a masculine ratio of hormones, these are kids who develop to be more aggressive, more likely ADHD, more likely to be autistic, all things that are seen more in boys. A feminine ratio, more likely to be anorexic, less likely to be athletic, things that develop more to the extreme in women. Exposure to the mother's hormones along with the fetus's own developing hormones can have a great impact on brain development, including possible links to sexuality. This is still very, very early in the studies, but the masculine or feminine ratio of hormones that is not as defined in children these are kids who tend to more likely self-identify as homosexual. You know, if you have somewhat of you're born a boy, but you don't have as masculine as a ratio as other boys, there is more of a possibility that you could identify that way, and vice versa with female. When looking at brain regions that typically differ in men and women, those who later transition due to being transgender almost always have the brain anatomy more similar to what they transitioned to than what they were naturally born with. Again, this is all very, very early, and it's very, very fascinating. It gets back to that idea of nature versus nurture. Are we born a certain way, or is it nurture? And by the way, all of this hormone exposure is in the nurturing stage. It's not quite a nature thing. So it's a really sort of a complex time, to say the very least. Other prenatal development risks, teratogens, chemicals, viruses that they're exposed to the embryo or the fetus can have a big, big deal. Kids who are born exposed to whose mothers are exposed to drug use, that drugs can go to the kid, and the kid can be born with an addiction. Smoking can develop lung development. Drinking, fetal alcohol syndrome, will develop brain issues. When you take a look right here, this is the brain. Oops, this is a normally developed brain. This is the brain of a mother who was an alcoholic, and therefore the kid's brain never gets a shot. And a lot of women will go, well, I drank because of the stress of the pregnancy. Well, you think the pregnancy was stressful. Raising a child who's underdeveloped brain here, you got stress for the rest of your life. 1991 study found that mothers who consumed just one drink a day during pregnancy had children who scored lower on IQ tests at age 4 than children whose mothers didn't drink. Even when environmental factors were accounted for, IQ scores were still lower. Malnutrition can have a similar impact. We see this in the Dutch famine era of World War II, where kids were more likely to be born with schizophrenia due to all of this prenatal stuff that happened. So again, we can make all sorts of arguments and debates about when does life truly begin. Is it at birth? Is it at conception? Is it when I accept you as a friend on Instagram? When does life truly begin? But parenting begins the day you find out that you're going to be that there's a pregnancy there. You're parenting already, and sometimes even before that. Preparing yourself, prior to that. Now, when it comes to newborn development, humans are born with very few natural instincts. Again, everything we do is learned, but there are some instincts that we have. One of them is what is called the grasping reflex. Now, this is actually a picture of me when my little daughter was born, and it's my finger right there, and she grabbed hold of it. And that was my very Mufasa Pride Rock moment that, she grabbed my finger. That's fantastic. But then I discovered, had you taken any instrument and put it in a child's hand, they're like a Venus flytrap. They grab onto it anyways. They'll grab onto a pencil. They'll grab onto whatever. This is a natural thing called the grasping reflex. And the reason that it's there is so that the child will grab hold of, the clothing or whatnot of the mother, similar to a monkey, so it can hold on while it is being fed. The rooting reflex, whereas if you touch any part of a child's face, they will move their mouth towards wherever that stimulation is, because again, they're looking for food. And then the sucking reflex is that once something is put into their mouths, babies and like puppies and kitties have this amazing ability to just naturally suck at things. So all of this, you'll notice all these reflexes, whether it's grabbing hold, finding, or sucking, all have to do with nutrition. And eventually these do not become instinctual, they become learned behavior, because it's through the sense of the reward the child learns to continue this behavior. Other things that are interesting are the moral reflex, which is a startle reflex, which is that when an infant is lying on its back and it's startled, most of us, when we're startled, will close up, will cover up, and like, oh, get away from me. Infants are the opposite. They just sort of open up like, here's my vital organs, kill me, which is a really sort of strange thing to do. Something else that they do is something called the Bamsky reflex. And the Bamsky reflex, again, is most people, when you stimulate, the little thing right here, we sort of, cup in. Babies kind of, their toes go out. The reason they go out is because, and they push against it as opposed to pull away from it, is to sort of prepare for walking. And this natural reflex, again, expires by about the time of the first birthday when most kids are walking. Speaking of walking, learning, etc., Kids will do it when they're ready to do it. A big problem that a lot of parents have is they push children to advance to a stage before they're ready to get to that particular stage. Hang on, I'm going to beat my dog here real quick. Okay, so my dog is now down here. So again, where I was leaving off with talking and walking and whatnot. Children will do what they're ready to do when they do it. When you push them before they're ready, it's actually going to stall their development. If you try to force a kid to walk before they can stand up, before they have depth perception and all these other things, that's just going to get in the way. And now they're going to be scared to walk, and it's actually going to stall their development. If you try to force them to speak a language before they're ready to comprehend and they're making those neural connections, it's going to be bad. There are no studies that show that how soon a child takes its first step towards their ability to get a college scholarship for athletics. There are no studies that show that. The kid will learn when they're ready to learn, but when you push them before they're ready, it's actually going to lead to fear, and it's going to stunt their growth. So again, maturation is when the child is ready to get to their next step, when they're ready to learn, which is the permanent change in brain structure that allows them to, in fact, do these particular tasks. So again, the neural development that happens in a little kid, newborn kid, not a lot of neural connections. By 1 month, you're making a ton of them. 9 months, unbelievable. 2 years, they're all over the place. And then once we get to be about the age of 5, we've got all of our neural connections. And then our adulthood tends to be making these neural connections more efficient. Here I'm learning a language. Here I'm using a language again and again and again. I'm learning to make the connections of phonetics and sounds and whatever. And here I'm using those connections again and again and again, which makes them better. So a newborn is born with very few neural connections. All 100 billion neurons have been created. They're just not connected. So the first 2 years of life, branches grow, we become more connected. And when born, our brain is only 25% of the adult size. By 2, it's 75% of adult size. And as we grow into adulthood, these connections become fewer and fewer, but they're more efficient. Best time to learn a second language is while learning the first one, because you're just throwing in extra words. Want to go to the restroom, bathroom, baño, you throw it in there. Because the kids are making these connections. This is where the greatest learning. You do more learning from 0 to 5 than you will do in any other 5 years of your entire life. I don't care where you go to college. This is the basis of who you are, and your learning happens at this time. Our senses start to develop. You see here your vision. You don't have a lot of depth perception, and you're seeing a lot of black and white. Color vision doesn't come until later on. Depth perception a little bit later. So again, this gets back to this idea of maturation. When you're trying to teach a child to walk before they have muscle development or before they have depth perception, you're going to lead to a lot of failures. Okay, babies can only see well 8 to 12 inches in front of them. Color is going to take 7 months. Normal vision is going to take 12 months, and all these other things. Babies like to look at faces and face-like objects more than any other objects. It's a natural attraction. If I show a baby this shape and this shape, they're going to like this shape more because that shape looks more like a face. I show them a yellow, a white, and a red. Interesting, red and white. A little more interesting words, kind of interesting face, very interesting. Babies are fine-tuned to look at faces, as are humans. We're naturally attracted to them. And we're trying to see faces that are like us, because when they're like us, we know they're more likely to be caregivers of us. 6 to 9 month old babies are better at telling the difference between monkey faces than adults can, because they're looking for these differences in faces. We lose the skill after about a year old because human faces are deemed more important than monkey faces. But again, voices, all these things, we're distinguishing who are our caregivers, who are our protectors, and who are maybe dangerous to us. Habituation, the idea of doing something again and again and again. When your babies get bored really easily, which is why you kind of need to give them new things to do. It's why the 2-year-old, they open up the present. This is fantastic. Hey, where's the box and the wrapper this came in? Now I want to go to that. The familiar things get old because I want to make new connections. I want to learn. This is also why, when you go for a walk with a 5-year-old kid, they see everything. Look at the bug, look at the tree, look at the this, look at the cloud, look at the whatever. We're less likely to take it in. They want to take everything in because they're making all these neural connections from 0 to 5. And again, every infant's development is unique, but you basically by 2 months, you're raising your head. 3 months, you're rolling over. 4 months, you're sitting with some support. 5.5 months without support. 10 months, you're crawling. You're standing by 12 months. You're walking by 12 months. You'll take care of it when you're ready to get there. Now, when it comes to cognitive development and changing the way that we think, Jean Piaget was a pretty radical psychologist about 100 years ago. He came up with this idea that was different than any psychologist before him. And it was this idea: kids think differently than adults. Boom. That was his incredible discovery. Because up until this point, about 100 years ago, we thought that children were just like mini adults. They were just little people who knew a little bit less. But we didn't think that they thought differently. But he came up with this idea that, yes, kids actually conceive things differently. They think differently. The world is different to them, and how they process the world is different. You say it's raining cats and dogs outside, it means it's really heavy in the rain outside. You tell a little kid it's raining cats and dogs, they're going to go outside, they're going to look for kitties, and they're going to look for puppies. Hi, kitty. Speaking of kitties. This ignores social and emotional factors. So our schema is a concept of framework sort of work out. And this sort of changes as we get older. And our schema is basically the way that we see the world. And then when we see the world in a certain way, then we got to decide this is our reality. For example, these two kids here were asked to draw a picture of a family. What is a family? Notice what the kid on the left drew and what the kid on the right drew. Now, again, both families, both with parents, both families. But notice that one kid looks a little bit happier than the other kid does. Look at the kid to the left. Mom is there holding hands. He's got the same weird haircut as his dad. Dad's like a superhero. They're both the same, got the weird big pants, got the same little crick in their back, whatever. This is what a family is. Sunshiny day, green grass, everyone's happy. That's a family. This kid over here, here's the kid in the foreground. Mom's way in the background. Maybe mom's working 1 or 2 jobs, so she's not always there and available. Definitely not holding hands. Here's dad in some little division between mom and dad right here, and then some little chippy has shown up and sort of gotten dad's attention. That's a little bit different definition of a family. Come here. A little kitty cat right here has just decided to break in. This is a cat. This is a cat. There's my cat right there. Say hello. This is Boomer. And again, speaking of schemas, I don't like cats. I hate cats up until I got this guy. This guy right here has changed my mind about cats. Now suddenly I like cats because they're big, fat, and floppy. So my schema about kitty cats has changed over the last year because I got this big, fat kitty cat. Has changed what my schema about kitties are. All right. So you now get down and go away. Bye, kitty. All right. Now my dog is chasing the cat. So now that we have a schema and our sense of reality, now what happens is our schema evolves over time. There's 2 things that happen to our schema, either an assimilation or accommodation. An assimilation means you take your reality of what the world is, and then you take things and you adapt them into your schema. Okay. How does what I'm currently experiencing fit into the world that I already know? Here's a great example over here of how schema works. This is from the movie Monsters, Inc. In the movie Monsters, Inc., this little girl sees Sully. Sully's a monster, basically a terrorist. And his job is to scare other kids to get energy, whatever. He's a terrorist. But anyways, he tries to scare the little girl, and the little girl isn't scared. As a matter of fact, the little girl has given Sully a nickname. The nickname that the little girl has given Sully is Kitty. She calls him a kitty. Why? Because he is furry. And as you just saw a second ago, kitties are furry. She probably has a kitty. She thinks that everything furry is a kitty. You're furry, you're a kitty. So again, she's not going to change her schema and be scared of this guy because to her, it's just the big kitty and I'm not scared of kitties. That's how he's assimilated into her schema. Now, an accommodation is when you realize something doesn't fit into my schema, so I've got to change my schema to make sense of the world. Again, Christmas, an assimilation of Christmas is you learn that there's a story of Rudolph, so you got an extra reindeer. All right. But then what happens with accommodation is you learn that there is no Santa Claus. Sorry if that's news to you, but you learn that there is no Santa Claus. So Christmas has instead of the past of going and seeing Santa Claus at the shopping mall or writing a letter to the North Pole, we've now accommodated Christmas to become, where's your list? What do you want? So now you've got to change your way of seeing the world to kind of fit into current beliefs. What you thought a boyfriend or girlfriend was in elementary school is not the same as what you think that it is today in your teens. And it's definitely not the same of what you're going to think of in your 20s. Right now, as you're dating in high school, you're not wondering, will this guy be a great earner in the future and will he be able to protect and take care? No, you're just like, he's cute, I'll date him now. What, he's got a nice car, that's all. You're not worried about that, but then you'll accommodate your schema later when you look for more things or whatever else the case may be. So Piaget basically said that this cognitive development happens in 4 stages. Okay, we've got the sensio-motor stage, which is 0 to 2, the pre-operational stage, which is 2 to 6, concrete operational 7 to 12, formal operational, which is 12 to adult. These are the 4 stages. So the sensio-motor stage of development, according to Piaget, which happens from birth to 2 years old, is where the baby takes in the new world through its senses. Sensio-motor, how do my senses and how do I react to it? Can now recognize their parents and family members, become wary of strangers and have strangers' anxiety because I'm crawling around. I realize, hey, not everyone here on this planet is here to take care of me. They start to get something that's called object permanence. And object permanence is to realize that even though something's there, it still does exist. Little babies don't get this. Little babies, you hide something, it's like it doesn't exist anymore. This is why some babies get really upset that their parents leave, because when the parent leaves, I start to cry because, oh my God, they don't exist anymore. That's why the game Peekaboo works with the 5-month-old kid. You close it and you go, Peekaboo, and they're like, oh, there you are. Oh, you cover up, where'd you go? Up, there you are. It's an exciting game for them. You do it to a 5-year-old, doesn't work so well because they realize you're just right behind that. But to a little baby, if I don't see something, it doesn't exist. It ceases to exist. Same thing with puppies and whatnot. It doesn't exist anymore. Now, once you gain this object permanence, then you can move to the next stage. And this is also shown with baby mathematics. If you got 2 objects in a case and then a screen comes up and you remove one of them and you put it down, there's still 2 there and the kid doesn't have any sort of reaction, they don't have the object permanence. If they have a sort of reaction like that's not right, and they react better to this, that means they do have object permanence because they've gotten that baby mathematics. The next stage is 2 to 6. 2 to 6 is where you begin to expand the use of language. 2 to 6 is where you start what is called pretend play, where you start to look at other things and see where do they fit in your life. You get together with your friends and you play school. I'll be the teacher, you be the kids. This is where animism is going on, where the idea that my stuffed animals have feelings, have opinions. By the way, Calvin and Hobbes is one of the greatest comic strips of all time. You want to have a good time. The Far Side, and Calvin and Hobbes. Those are you'll thank me later. But you begin to look at the world the way that it's not in front of them. You begin to work out the rules of life. You tend to have imaginary friends at this time. Sometimes ineffective reasoning is going on. There's not a lot of logic, so it's difficult to judge cause and effect from. This is where language development is starting from 2 to 6 years of age. Many claim that it's a critical period of learning language, and we'll talk about language in Unit 6 more detail. But children start to learn language before they can even speak it. The child learns the word no really quickly because it's a loud sound. No, don't do that. And they start to mimic the sounds they hear. They gain the language and the dialect of those around them, which is why baby talk is it's fine to talk to a baby in a way that you're enunciating the words correctly with the excitement of the baby, because we tend to overannounce. Do you want to go to the park? Are you having fun? Da, 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 da. That's fine. Talk to a baby. But when you talk to a baby and mispronounce words, did your baby want to go to the park? You want to go to a park? Is your park fun? Don't do that, because now they're going to mispronounce park. So the way the baby hears the words is the way they're going to start to make the words. They pay more attention to higher pitched sounds. We overemphasize. Do you want to go to the park? And then what happens is the babies start to mimic these things at that particular time. And again, we'll get to this more down the road. 2 to 6 years of age, a child is also very egocentric. And when I say egocentric, it's not like a teenage egocentricism, which is totally different. A baby's egocentricism is the way that I see the world. It's the way that everybody sees the world. For example, you got a little 5-year-old kid, they walk in front of the TV screen, sucking a juice box, whatever. And you're like, hey, would you move it? And they're like, what? You can't see this? I can see this. How can you not see this? The way they see the world is the way everybody should see the world. This is why when the baby with a 4-year-old kid, they drop their ice cream cone, they start to cry, and you're like, why are you so upset? They look at you like, why are you not upset? You should be feeling this too. Obviously, the ice cream cone is down. You should be as upset as I am. They see the world the way they see the world. And they assume that that world is the way everybody else sees it. It's why they're terrible at the game hide and go seek. A couple of 5-year-old playing hide and go seek, they suck at the game. Because again, I can't see you, you can't see me. They're terrible at it. They're brutal at it. Hiding in plain sight. And again, this isn't being selfish. This isn't being inconsiderate. It's just the way that they see the world. That's their way. And this is also when they start to pick up theory of the mind. And theory of the mind, when you get out of this stage, you can start to see it from other people's perspective. This little test right here is how you test theory of the mind. Here's Sally. Sally has a basket. This is Anne. Anne has a box. Sally has a marble. She puts the marble into the basket. Sally goes for a walk. While Sally is gone, Anne takes the marble out of the basket and puts it into the box. Sally now comes back. Where will Sally look for her marble? Will she look for it in the basket, or will she look for it in the box? Now, logically, she should look for it in the basket. Why? Because that's where she left it. But to a 5-year-old child, the 5-year-old child will say, look in the box. It's in the box. I saw it get put in the box, so you look in the box. The way I see the world is the way everybody sees the world. I have this information, so certainly you should have this information too. He can't take the perspective that Sally wasn't there and Sally didn't see it. He can't see it from her perspective. So again, empathy at 4, 5, 6 years of age is really hard to do. And some of us, this theory of the mind gets in our way. Most people want to punish street crime more than white collar crime. Why? Because we can't empathize with street crime. Most of us can't realize to be strung out on drugs or whatever, which would make us steal a car. We can't even dream of doing something like that. But yet, when someone fudges on their taxes, when somebody maybe gets a little insider trading help with the stock market, we could see ourselves doing that, because that no one gets hurt and it's harmless, right? When in fact it's not. This is why a lot of people don't want to raise taxes on the wealthiest top 5%, because everybody assumes that at some point of their life, they're going to be in that top 5%. They can see it from their perspective. We can't see it from the guy who does the carjacking or the guy who mugs or the person who, because we would never do that. But white collar crime, we tend to be a little bit more sympathetic to, because we can see that even though white collar crime takes way more money, way more damaging than street crime is. And it's really strange the way that we look at that. Now, people who have autism, people who suffer from autism, somewhere on the spectrum or whatnot, a lot of the determinant, I don't know if determinant is the right word, but a characteristic of autism a lot of times is not having this theory of the mind. Asperger's, great example of a version of autism. Asperger's kid is a kid who's just going to say what's on their mind at that particular moment, not realizing, hey, it's not your turn to talk or whatever. And again, you're not being selfish. I have something to say. I'm now going to say. You're not looking at it from other people's perspectives. And a lot of times, if you have a sibling with autism, a relative with autism, someone with autism, one of the things that they really sort of struggle with are these nonverbal cues. They don't pick up sarcasm. Why wouldn't you just tell the truth? Why are you being sarcastic? Jokes are a little bit harder to come by at times. This is also why autism starts to be identified at the age of 7, 8, 9, 10, because by 7, 8, 9, 10, you should have your theory of the mind sort of worked out. And the kids who don't have it, that's sort of a sign that maybe you need to be tested for autism. And this is where the whole anti-vaccination for autism gets in the way, because people are like, oh my God, my child got vaccinated at 4 or 5 or 6, and suddenly they're diagnosed with autism. You can't diagnose someone who's 4 or 5 or 6 with autism. It's not really going to show itself till 7, 8, 9, 10, where the behavior isn't necessarily matching their peers and they're falling somewhere on the spectrum. And there's a lot of different forms of autism. When people go, oh, you're somewhere on the spectrum, I would almost argue we're all somewhere on a spectrum, that we all have our own little quirks and whatnot. But this, when you're talking about somebody with autism, it kind of gets in the way of their day-to-day functions. Some people have autism, you have no idea that they do. So it's a very, very interesting thing. And again, you could get a master's in this, a PhD in this, and really study. It's really sort of fascinating stuff that goes on there that we don't have the time to go over. Now, again, the other thing with the pre-operational stage from 2 to 6, this is also where you start to get what's called conservation. And conservation is to realize that things can be different yet still be the same at the same time. You can't apply this when you're egocentric. You can't see this other perspective, so you can't see the other perspective of shapes. For example, I got 2 cups of water right here. I take 1 cup of water, I put it into a taller beaker. So now this one looks taller than that one, but they both have the same amount of water in it. But if I ask a 5-year-old kid, does this one have more? Does that have more? Do they have the same? A lot of times they'll say this has more. Why? Because this is more than that. It's logical, right? More, less, more, less. The one down there is taller. This one over here is shorter. That one has more. So again, this idea that things can change but still be the same. You have here's marbles, I spread them out. What has more, this or this? More, less. They don't quite have that idea that I could change things, but even when I change things, they can be the same, something that a 4 to 6-year-old struggles with. Next lecture, we'll talk more about Piaget's stages of development here for you.